Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Saath podcast, Asra's newest initiative where we talk about substance use disorders within the context of the Punjabi community.
Through inviting mental health experts, researchers, community members, and those with lived experiences, we discuss everything from the history of addiction to the lived realities of Punjabi families alongside providing relevant resources.
We are your hosts. I'm Ravia. I'm a community organizer and researcher from Edmonton.
I'm Manvinder, a social work PhD student from Winnipeg.
I'm Harleen, and I'm a medical student and anthropologist from Indiana.
I'm Harpreet. I'm a clinical researcher and an epidemiologist from Toronto. Thanks for joining us, and let's start the conversation.
Hi, everyone. We hope you're doing well. We're so happy to welcome you back to the Saath podcast. Today, we're really excited to welcome Palwinder Gill. She is a registered clinical counselor specializing in trauma-informed, attachment-based, and somatic psychotherapy. Her clinical background spans community mental health, correctional environments, and forensic psychiatric services, and her work is deeply rooted in trauma healing, attachment repair, and nervous system informed practice. She has extensive experience supporting individuals, couples, families, and parents in understanding how early attachment experiences shape emotional regulation, coping patterns, and relational dynamics. So we'll get into what all of that means over the next hour, but we're so excited to have you, Blavinder. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much, Manvinder, for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you again, Belinda, for being here. So I'm just going to start off with something very basic. So we're just really curious about how did you get to where you are now as a counselor?
Yes, it's been a while since someone asked me this question, so it's a good refresher. I think we're actually, I mean, I was always interested in psychology. I was always like, even as a kid, like I read a lot of books and I was always interested in like, like what is the purpose of the way we behave and stuff like that. But I think the hit point, it actually came when I was really struggling with the relationship or like when I was struggling with dating. Like I was constantly attracting people that were unavailable, emotionally unavailable, and I was exhausted. And that sort of that is when I sort of, I someone suggested I should do therapy, and I was like, therapy, no, like because I was like, in school and university, people like all my friends thought I was really smart, and I would usually give relationship advices to people, but now I know you shouldn't do it if you've never been in a relationship. So I don't know. I thought I was like quite smart and I knew like, what but with with the relationship, I really struggled. I struggled for like a good decade, I would say. And then obviously I knew somewhere around therapy. And so I just sort of, went to see a therapist, and that sort of, it changed the way I looked at it. I'm like, oh my God, there's such a big need for it because, people like us, we don't know why we're just bumping into wrong people, like we have no idea how our childhood impacts our, adult life, how it impacts the way we receive or, think about love in our adulthood. So, my therapist, that she just like, I had a really good therapist. She right went into my childhood and we explored a lot of my childhood trauma. And yeah, it was just amazing for me to see it. And like I said, I was already reading a lot of books and I already was taking like psychology and philosophy classes, even with my in my degree. So I decided to major in psychology and do this counseling. Somehow I felt home when I entered that therapy room. I felt like this is where I belong. And yeah, so that's how it all started, and I've never looked it back. I love what I do, and I think it's just it's the need of an hour, especially for our culture, to really to to really know what childhood can do, like things that we learn, the things we experience, the things we absorb in our childhood, how they get it, like how they impact us in adult. It's amazing to see the impacts of it.
So I think that's really interesting. And I feel like you're not our first guest to say that the position that they're in right now, it was almost like it was like some calling outside of themselves that brought them to this place. And now that you're in this position, it just feels so right. So it's always interesting to hear how like different guests conceptualize that. I also think it's really interesting that you grounded your experience, like now being a counselor, in your previous experiences with counseling. I think it's always interesting when people bring that dichotomy. So is like parents, children, like is that something like a population you focus on now? Like I'm just curious about what your focus is broadly now.
So, with every client, and like I knew, like all the adult patterns are somehow they're stemming from childhood. So, with every client I see, and we just keep going to we just keep going back to childhood. And so that's sort of, sort of, got some excitement in me is I really need to focus on the parenting, especially within this culture. We need to do the parenting in a healthy, emotionally regulated way. And I need to sort of, work in this community on the parenting part, and that's where, me going on to radio shows and really talking about or doing my own podcast about parenting, because I knew this was like where we're handling future adults here. And if we could switch the paradigm, if we could switch like the way we parent, like we would save so much trouble in future for these adults. Like they would be healthy, emotionally resilient people, not like, not like for like us, like no, like being 23, 24 and not knowing why you're bumping into wrong people, and looking love in a very wrong places, and just sort of that. So that's how it started my parenting work, and that sort of is my focus at this moment. Is I work with as many parents I can, but I also do do couples therapy and individual therapy. But I'm like, there's always a parent in a room. Like even if you're not a parent, but you're also talking about the parent that sort of that raised you. So I always say, like, if you don't have a child, then you are like, it's just like working through how do you parent the inner child that's in you, that still is not able to emotionally regulate itself, and that still gets out of control and still has unhealthy coping mechanisms and patterns that are making the adult life dysfunctional. So I just look at, I think every relationship, it's just sort of a parent. You don't have another parent, but you just sort of have to parent yourself at this moment. So sometimes people will be like, I'm not a parent. So I'm like, you know what? There's tons of us to look at it, how you were parented, how what your childhood was. So, yeah, so that's sort of is what I work with right now. His main focus is a lot of parenting work.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess I'm trying to connect kind of the stuff that was mentioned in your bio, which can kind of be these like big, lofty, like psychotherapy terms, to what you do in your practice and like what shows up there. So, yeah, I'm kind of wondering what challenges do you most commonly see in your clients as a result of these childhood traumas? What are these patterns that people are going back to that make these relationships dysfunctional? Maybe what we would call like unhealthy coping mechanisms. Yeah, what's showing up for your clients?
You know what, I think one of the challenge for us is because we have been taught that parent, like we were supposed to worship a parent. Like we're always supposed to think that even as children, that parents are ultimately the God and they're the right for us. So I think when that sometimes gets challenged, although I always come from a very compassionate lens, and I always say that, they did the best, the resources they had. They've also been brought up, in a sorry, emotionally unhealthy, regulated way. So I always use that sort of a compassion lens, but I understand like people sometimes get defensive and they're like, no, my childhood was right. And that sometimes does get in a way. And, I have to constantly remind my clients that actually we're not attacking your parents. We're not blaming your parents. We're just trying to understand the history so if we can understand the history, then we can sort of change the current patterns that we have. It just helps you to build a better adult life in this moment. And that's why we're sort of going back into that childhood and collecting those moments. So I think that sort of is a hiccup for our culture to really, when they immediately, they're like, no, my parents didn't do anything wrong. They did all the right things. So although my lens is, I have a lot of compassion for our parents, and I think we're evolving, and they, like I said, they did the best they could do it. So, that is one of the hiccups. And the other one is, I think, I work like, so what happened is, if I can describe you a little bit of a trauma, right? Trauma gets stored in our nervous system. you know. So what happened is, because it gets stored in our nervous system, it gets stuck there, and you continue, like, you just keep reacting to it for years and years, and you don't know how to turn that off in your nervous system. So and then one of the ways we work is I work somatic work system, which nervous system, which we work with the nervous system. We actually go into the body, we feel the emotions that are stuck there, and we actually have practical solutions, how to sort of use the healthy patterns to get out of that coping mechanism. So for example, I'll give you an example for that. Like, let's say if you were like 5-year-old, right? You were bit by a dog, right? So, and you were bit by a dog, and there was nobody around you to protect you, right? So trauma, okay, I'm sure we'll explore that going forward, as what trauma is. So there was a dog, and then you got bit by a dog, and there was nobody to protect you, and you had to protect yourself, right? And you ran for your life, and whatever you did to protect yourself. So the event was not the trauma. The trauma was that something within your nervous system changed to protect yourself. So which means the nervous system gets alarmed whenever there's so let's say, for example, like your 40-year-old, you have like a little puppy around you. Your body's reacting, your body's vibrating, you logically, this puppy can't do any damage to me. It can't, like, put me in danger, because I'm much bigger than the puppy, right? But the nervous system is still responding to the threat that was when you were 5 years old. So your nervous system didn't catch up with your body's age. Your so and then you continue to react to that. So this is what we do. So we kind of look at the triggers that we have, and we kind of connect that you're actually not like, this is not a 40-year-old responding to a puppy. This is a 5-year-old responding to a puppy. And the 5 years old's body is very anxious, and it's overwhelmed. And you can imagine, right? Like, when there's a 5 or 6-year-old, and there's a dog around, and it has to protect itself. I'm sure that the body would get anxious, the body would get overwhelmed. So most of the situations that in our life that appears, we're actually not reacting to the present, we're reacting to the past. And I help my client to bring them into the present, but knowing this is something that you are reacting to the past, which is not present at this moment, but your body didn't catch up with that yet. Your body thinks, I'm still reacting to that puppy when I was 5-year-old, and there was nobody around to save me, and I had to save myself. So that's a lot of nervous system regulation that we do, where we work with the situation that my clients are struggling with, and we connect how you're still using the coping mechanism of a 6-year-old child, and that's why it's failing.
Yeah, that's really helpful context. I guess, yeah, kind of pivoting a little. I know, yeah, this podcast is about addiction and specifically alcohol use. So I'm wondering how that shows up in your clients, and then particularly how that relates, like how you work with folks who maybe that stems from like childhood trauma, or yeah, people who have like poor coping mechanisms. And I'm wondering both about like people who use substances and people who had people in their lives that used substances. So like if your parent or someone in your family you had like a negative relationship with substances, maybe we can start with like, yeah, people who use substances themselves, and then yeah, pivot to people who grew up in families where there was substance use.
Yeah, so if we talk about addiction, I think so what it really stems for was, somehow all of us have some addicting patterns, right? We have some addiction, and addiction, what it does is, it's a temporary relief from that pain that you're feeling inside of you as a result of an event that triggered it, right? So for men, a lot of in our culture, the only way to cope with that emotional pain was alcohol. For so many years, that's how sort of they dealt with their emotions, or they suppressed more of it, and because men sort of dealt with it that way, their emotional regulation, sort of not regulation, but I mean, they're just sort of whatever, the temporary relief emotionally. So that sort of got them into using alcohol, but they also grew up seeing a father use the same coping mechanism, and then the maybe grandfather used it. So it just kind of gets passed down to. So I always tell everybody that, all of us are in addiction. Some of us chooses substances, some of us chooses people, some of us you chooses other patterns that we like, other things. So all of, like, none of us have been, like, I've been addicted to getting validation from people, or being a people pleaser, like that sort of something. So, and same way the alcohol addiction, it's a temporary relief, and a lot of alcoholism does stem from, most of it stems from a childhood trauma, which was, the situations were extremely painful, and it was very overwhelming for the child to actually stay in that environment and feel regulated, you know. So I think that's where the alcoholism stems from as well, is that, a lot of childhood damage, childhood trauma, and being and very sensitive. People with addiction, people have a lot more sensitivity, because some people are sensitive, and some people are very sensitive, and some people are not that sensitive. It's just like, two people can go outside, and one can say, like, this is really cold, the other one's like, it's okay, like, I'm wearing the same layers, but it's fine. It's just because sometimes some people are more sensitive, right? So what I've noticed with working in an addiction with alcohol, with other, it usually happens to be very sensitive males, sensitive people, that sort of went through a lot of emotional damage.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering, how does like the diversity of the Punjabi experience come up for you? Even with, I think, like different generational immigration patterns, I think about that a lot. Like my parents immigrating versus folks immigrating now, those experiences are really different, and the knowledges they're coming with are really different. So, yeah, how do we think about a diversity of Punjabi experiences? And yeah, maybe how do we think about those without being like paternalistic? Like yeah, like there's not like one correct way of being, but that, like, as you kind of were saying, that like being empathetic and like seeing that there's like all these different ways of being.
Yeah, what I've noticed, even when I worked with our culture, and I mostly work with our culture clients, is I think the difference is diversity is also from where the background is. Sometimes, we can be like there could be two Punjabis, but where the background can be very different, and the traumas that they bring could be very different, right? So, for example, like someone who survived 1984, you know, like their bodies are at a different vibration, right? Someone who went through when India and Pakistan sort of divided, somebody who's seen that trauma. So I think, in that way, like I'm like, with every generation, there's obviously a new way of, like, there's diversity around it as well. But if you were to look at the background, right, sometimes, like, just like, well, I work with the, like, for example, like, a lot of clients I worked with as well, that went to boarding school, and there was a lot of trauma there, you know. So, but you wouldn't like, and then there was like people that lived at home but also experienced trauma. So it's like, it's sort of very different from person to person as well, and how, like what sort of buffering system they had. Like sometime I would see, like, in a family there's like a lot of alcoholism, and then there was a client who, and then he actually didn't end up being alcoholic. He wasn't. So there were some buffering things, like, maybe the connection point he had with his one of his uncle, like that sort of saved him, because he unknowingly sort of emotionally regulated him, and that sort of helped him not to rely on alcohol um for to numb or suppress. But he also obviously had some other issues that he came to me for. But it's just like, it's just different, like when I look into it, and you dive, you put, like, you sort of dissect the environment. Everybody's history and the way they take that history is different. Like, for example, like when I work with clients, and they'll say, like, these two kids, they've been brought up in the same home, but not two children, they don't experience that environment the same way. It's like, if there's a girl and there's a boy, or there's two boys and there's a girl, one maybe tend to be more sensitive than the other one. One's personality triggers a parent more than the other. and one's personality doesn't trigger the other. So we don't actually, sometimes I always say, like, we don't actually end, we don't even grow, even if we're siblings, we don't grow up in the same home. We grow up in a different home. So, um, in that way, I think, like, if you get into, but of course, I think, like, I've worked with clients that have gone through 1984, that have had separations, and and of course, like you said, like, there's a lot of things that unite us, but there's a lot of other things that really, let us separate as well.
Actually have a clarifying question as well. So the way that I'm like kind of conceptualizing this conversation is something that I actually that parallels this is that at my workplace, like we work very closely with Indigenous health advisors. And when we're creating care systems and care transition systems, we always like have this idea of like, how do you actually balance knowledge of, colonial history, neoliberal violence that's Indigenous people are experiencing today. So how do you balance that knowledge with your expert knowledge as in your capacity as a counselor, right? So in your instance, balancing your knowledge of, Punjabi history, 1984, partition, immigration nowadays, but then how do you balance that in your role as a counselor where, you don't want to like, well, I don't know, like if this is like what you do, but it's like almost like in my mind where it's like, you don't want to like prescribe a history to someone and say like, oh, this was a history that you went through. But if it is something that they talk about and it's something that you know about, like how do you balance like that person's individual experience with this knowledge of history that you have?
Certain things are common, and but then for other things it's actually the client who's expert in their life, and who's actually can, like, if you sort of dig through their history, they can tell you so much more. But as a counselor, it's also important not to have bias and not to sort of predict someone's journey, like, for example, like, like the common one would be like women not coming out of a relationship, or men not leaving a relationship. Like, there's a lot of society shame as well, but there could be different factors for each person as well, like other different contributing factor to that unhealthy relationship, or not being able to exit that relationship, right? So, I think as a counselor, you can't predict other people. Just because, two people come from same country doesn't mean they sort of go through the same thing. Uh, Everybody's sensitivity, everybody's way of, like, their perception lens, and how, like, a lot of those factors come in. So I actually, I have a, like, the narrative that I work from client is like, they actually tell me, and they are the expert in their own life, and the more you can, because it, like, what is their justification or being in the situation that they are in, how is it that, so I don't know if that's what you were asking, but I don't know, but I've, like, with every client and all the over stories, and like you said, history, there's a couple of, like, similar points for us. Like, yes, like, culturally, we were given a box, and because I come from the culture, it helps me to understand, right? Some of the things I can pick up, right? So for example, like, I can pick up if someone says, like, in 1980, my mother wasn't able to leave a relationship. I can pick that up because I've been to India. I know, like, 1980, it wasn't easy for women to just, like, divert, just see unhealthy relationship and walk away. It wasn't easy, and sometimes some of those women that even working it wasn't easy, because there was a society, like, you had to fight the society to be able to get out of that relationship. So some of those background knowledge is there, and it helps, but that's not to say, there's obviously different cases that where, clients talk about it, and um the purpose of therapy is actually to pick up a pattern, is to actually, hang on with the pattern that they're using right now, that is still making their life dysfunctional or putting them on addiction path, you know so we just have to, like, as counselor, we just have to grab that pattern that's still sort of running their life, and making it unhealthy and dysfunctional. Like, like, some of the knowledge, having being able to, like, knowing India helps, some of that knowledge, but that's not all of it. Like, I can't, say that that's, I, like, not everybody sort of gone through the same tunnel, like, and especially now generation, right? They're having different, like, when they come from their couples fight, there's a different fights, so if I see like a 1980 couple, they don't actually come and they don't fight about, like, whose role, because their roles are so defined. And like as a counselor, I don't really like, and maybe, I mean, most of the time that's not the role they come for, right? They're fine. They're like, okay, we've got these roles and we're going to stay in these roles, right? How can we become, but if I see today's, today's clients, their role, this is different, right? Their roles are not defined. They're not like yes, this is it. This is he will do. They're very like gray line area where everybody sort of finds their own water that they can flow on.
So I actually wanted to pivot a little bit. So you did mention that you noticed differences between your male and female clients, in terms of kind of the different experiences and backgrounds that they bring to your sessions. So I was just wondering, one, how do you navigate that as a counselor while again, like trying to maintain individual experiences? And then also, do you see like differences between female experiences, male experiences within the Punjabi context on a broader scale? Or is that something like isn't like relevant to your work?
Yeah, so the way females are conditioned in a whole house is very different from how the male is conditioned, you know? So that's always, that's there as well. And what I've seen within our culture is female, lot of caretaking, caretaking extended family members. So it's a lot of caretaking and maybe mostly taking more than they can actually, that they can handle. That's sort of the pattern that I've seen. But they're more expressive, right? Also, they're more expressive when they're feeling something, they can say it. But with male clients, they're more into suppression, right? Like they would, like if they feel something, like I had a client who got fired from a job and he said, I could I can't come home and tell my family, like, but whereas female, she wouldn't, I mean, she would hesitate, but she wouldn't have a problem telling home, like, I'm actually, I got laid off or got fired from a job, because she's conditioned different way, right? Male is conditioned different way. So in that way, like, two people get fired, just gender difference. Male has hard time actually, letting the family know that I don't have a job. But whereas female has it easier that way, right? So a lot of suppression for men, I would say, and expression, but expression for women, but they are exhausted by the caretaking pattern that they've signed up on. Like it's like, my God, like there's so many women that have sat in my office, and like some of them, they would say we have two kids or three kids, and then when we really go into the history of it, they don't have two, three kids. They actually have eight or nine kids. you know and I would say, like, like obviously if you have eight kids, you're going to be busy mommy. You're going to be exhausted mommy. You don't expect things to be run smoothly, right? Whereas male, like I said, usually the emotional regulation is always alcohol, not talking about it, very lonely gender. um, so it's usually a lot of like, I cannot let myself see other people that I'm weak. I cannot let other people see that I need help. I can't let other people see that I'm struggling. Like this is really hard and overwhelming for me. So I can't see that. So those are some of the patterns that show up during that therapy.
Okay, that's really interesting. So I also think it's interesting that you brought up that women, they do a lot of invisible labor, especially when they themselves may not be having these negative experiences, and it's rather their partner. So I'm actually curious, so what kind of coping mechanisms do you see amongst like children or family members in response to somebody who may be struggling? So I don't know whether you do group counseling or if it's just one-on-one counseling, but is there several instances where you're treating somebody, but then obviously something that I believe in is like usually within a family unit, when someone's ill, I feel like everyone's ill, like in certain ways. I think it's the same way when people say like a parent's as happy as their least happiest child. So how do you like what patterns do you see amongst like people responding to someone being like sick or seeking help?
That's true. I think it impacts dramatically when the mother is sick in the family. Then everybody's sick, you know. But with the children, a lot of the symptoms are like, acting out in school, like having a lot of physical health issues, like having fever, or like, a lot of like digestive issues, because children respond in a different way. They can't really just come up to you and say, like, I'm actually very stressful, that you and dad are having constant fights and you guys are thinking about divorce, their body will respond in having like digestive issues, not eating, not sleeping, bedwetting, and going into school and having a lot of aggression and not getting along with people at school, not being able to focus. So, like you'll know when the child is struggling, and sometime in our culture would say, okay, this is the age, but not really. Like when it's becoming a dysfunctional, you'll know. The school will call you, the teachers will call you, and they'll let you know. So, yeah, those are some of the symptoms that become as that I've seen in children, that usually end up becoming environmental problems at home, becoming environmental stresses at home. And like I said, sometimes men don't know how to ask for help. Women are actually a little bit better than that way. But even like like yeah, one of the thing in this culture is that we want to be independent. Everybody wants to be independent, and people don't want to ask for help. And that's something, yeah, I'm seeing a lot of, like, our age people that come into my office are actually like very lonely, but they wouldn't ask for help. So I don't know, it's the culture that's really, wants us to be self-sufficient and self-independent and make sure that we've got it all together and we shouldn't need anybody. So yeah, so I think that's also one of the pattern that I'm seeing within this generation today. But yeah, with children, you can see those symptoms. But yeah, with parents as well, I think it parents, like conflicts not being able to get resolved, and you're irritated, you're frustrated, uh, you know, and men's alcoholism goes up, when there's something not well. Like for example, like father is in depression, that's impacting everybody, the children and the wife. The wife is becoming more exhausted because now maybe she's also taking care of husband as a child too. Like some of those family members are like where there's a woman is also caretaking the husband too, along with her.
So you kind of framed this in your own personal experience when we first chatted about this, where you had like your challenges with dating, and then that's what prompted you to go to therapy. So now I guess, like, being a seasoned therapist yourself, what do you think are some, I guess, signs or like signals that people can take note of, like as a lesson, upon hearing this lesson or this podcast, in terms of, okay, maybe this is a negative coping mechanism that I might need a bit of help with. So, like, what do you think are some common signs or things that people can take note of?
You mean in relationships, right?
Just broad.
Just broad.
Okay. So, yes, I mean, you just have to think, like, for example, if you were to look at relationships, right? And if you're struggling in relationship and sometimes you just sort of, keep having the same relationship issue over and over, then you know that you're stuck somewhere, And usually I tell clients that and the clients that actually end up in my office are the one that have exhausted all the resources, right? And they feel helpless and they feel like that's it, like they've done what they could done, but it's not helping, right? So I think if you are feeling overwhelmed and you're exhausted, it's because you're using the same pattern. You want that pattern to work, but it's failed you so many times, So I think like for example, like if I were to go back with my relationship history, I was exhausted and tired because I kept bumping into people who were emotionally unavailable, who weren't like emotionally or relationship wise healthy, and that was very overwhelming, exhausting, and helpless and lonely because I couldn't talk to anybody about it. So I'd say, whenever you feel like you've exhausted your resources, you you can't do this and you feel stuck, that's usually a pattern that's keeping you stuck. You know, whatever it may be in a relationship, maybe it's food wise, maybe it's alcoholism wise, maybe it's in addiction wise, whatever it may be, but it is your pattern that's keeping you stuck, and it keeps bringing that situation back over and over again because the pattern hasn't changed, and that's from your side. You don't have to worry about other people changing them. Like when I work with couples, they're like, well, if I change the other person, and I said, you only need to, and I even with parents, I only say you just need to change one parent in the home. That's it. You know, two parents don't have to be on a line. Like if they that because we don't live in a perfect world, and it's we're not always gonna have like someone who partner is gonna be like, oh, we're on the same page. So it only requires one parent, and it only requires one person to change. And we don't have to make dramatic changes sometime too. Like we don't like for example, like I worked with this woman, and she couldn't ask for help. you know she had a hard time, and she was exhausted and tired, and she kept sort of feeling that everybody's depending on her, and nobody's sort of coming out to help her, and nobody, but she did not know how to receive help. The problem was not that the help wasn't coming her way. She didn't know how to receive help, because as a child she's been self-sufficient, and she didn't need anybody, and she that was her coping mechanism, is I'm not going to need anybody, I'm going to do all of it myself, right? So sometimes the little change that we made in our routine is to, once in a week, you're going to ask for help, just once in a week. Maybe you're going to ask your husband, maybe you're going to ask someone, your friend or your relative, to maybe take care of your kids for like 1 hour. That's it. So it's not a big change, but actually it impacts you in a bigger way, and it has a really big positive good results. But it's a very small change. In like 1 week, for 1 hour, you're going to ask for help, right? So I think yeah, like wherever you feel like you're stuck, and you keep getting the situation same, you keep ending up with the same people, and you feel like you've been in this relationship for 5 years, and you're not able to resolve it, and you're not able to quit, then that's where you're stuck, because your pattern is keeping you stuck. And if you feel like this alcohol it's making me sick, my doctors are now telling me, but I can't quit it, like I can't put, like when I see alcohol, I have hard time putting the glass down, and my nervous system, nobody can help. I think one of the things that we actually is like, nobody can help me with that. I think that is the narrative that we make, because therapy is very new, and we don't know how to access therapy as well. you know so be it with whatever alcohol, be it, but mostly I think when you feel stuck, and when you feel stuck, which means your resources, whatever you have, isn't working, the patterns that you're carrying aren't working.
Yeah, I guess something I'm thinking about is what you shared about like two people not having to be on the same page, that like maybe just one person doing some of that changing can be helpful enough. I guess in my own experience with therapy, that's like not the case. Because I think the person that goes to therapy is the one that's like getting hurt by these patterns that maybe they're in, but everyone else is benefiting from these patterns. Like, we all benefit from our moms doing all the work. So, yeah, I guess it feels like so unfair that, like, women are the ones being harmed. You have to go to therapy and you have to change something, and everyone around you, but they're not all on the same page as you. Because you're the one getting hurt, so you need things to change, but nobody else needs things to change. And then again, you're the one that has to do the work to make sure that you're not the one doing all the work. So that's like something I think about, something my mom's brought up when I try to like talk to her about like, yeah, how to redistribute the labor in the house. And she's like, that's more labor for me to redistribute the labor. And like, if I'm 55, I've been doing this for 30 plus years, like maybe this is fine. So often I think it's actually like the people who are doing the harm that kind of also have to buy in. And I found this to be true in like my personal, like romantic relationship as well, that like I was trying to do enough therapy for both of us, but only one of us was buying into it, that something was wrong and something needed to change. So the other person, until they bought in and realized something was wrong and that we could change it, only then were we able to like progress forward in a way that was like helpful for both of us. So I'm wondering, yeah, like, does that come up for your clients? How do you deal with that? Yeah, like, how do you balance kind of like the pushback that your clients give you? You kind of already mentioned it, but I wonder if there's like more tension around that, especially when there's only buy-in from one person in this, like, yeah, more of a dyad, or, yeah, more than two family type relationship.
So, very good question. And so what happened is, and because we don't live in a perfect world, and most of the time, two parent or couple, like it's very hard to get the other person in therapy, and even some, for that matter, for your child as well. So let's for example, like let's work with that, let's think of that mother who's doing all the labor, right, who's doing all the work, and she's exhausted, and the husband is asking her what to make for food, and she's got her children. So if you just work with that woman, you understand she doesn't know how to say no, right? And if she learns how to say no, and if she learns how to protect herself, and if she learns how to protect her resources, other people will adjust to that. you know it's because she's not able to say no. And then other people, of course, the world, like, people are around us are lazy. Like I always tell, like, if you were to go to your bank and get all your money out and hand out in the public, nobody's going to tell you, no, 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 we don't want your money. They're going to be like, yeah, yeah. It's just because we have to put money in the bank, we have to protect it so that we have the resources that when we need it, right? So same way, like, well, for example, like working with that mother, right? She needs to, the skill is for her. She needs to learn how to protect myself. She needs to learn how do I protect my resources. She needs to learn that I can say no. This is all her skill and evolution, and people will adjust to that, and I work with a lot of women, and one of them I was working with, and the first week, so we made like one or two changes where she would say no, and it was very uncomfortable for her to say no, because she's like, I, like, whenever my child like, if my 19-year-old child says I want to eat this, and you want me to say no to them, like, how could I say no to them? I can't say no to them, right? So being able to have enough courage to go to the unnatural part of you, which is to say no, which is not very natural for mothers, and especially if their son, or if their kids, or want them to make something. And she started saying no, you know in 3 weeks of time, and she was very at the edge of exhausted, and 3 weeks of time, she said, I live in the same house, but I'm less exhausted, because she said, my no, people have adjusted. Yes, people have, first, like, my son didn't like it, and that's true. But after 3 weeks, she's like, everybody's getting the hang of it. Everybody understand that I'm gonna say no, to this. So just within 3 weeks, just within changing her own skill set, she was able to alter the environment at home. And that was the home that she wanted to run away at one time. And after 3 weeks, she's like, I can, like, this is fine, like, I can do it. So the purpose is that, what are some skill set as that we can accomplish, or train ourselves, so that we can, because other people are addicted to our patterns, and they can even manipulate us for patterns as well. So for example, like, I had one of my client, like, every time a relative asked him, I need money, he gave them money, and he was like going in negatives in with his bank account, but he couldn't say no to people when people asked for money. He didn't know how to say. So it wasn't people that were taking advantage of him, it was this pattern that was that got him stuck in that situation. He kept having more money to pay to the bank. So when he realized that actually this is not other people, but when he came to my office, he said, this person is bad. This person, they don't think about me. They keep asking me for money. And then, when we work together, he realizes this is actually his own pattern to get validation from other people, to get him right? So he changed, he altered his pattern, and then people stopped asking for money because he learned something called no. you know, which wasn't accessible. And this is what childhood trauma does, right? And you can imagine that this person grew up in a home where saying no was dangerous. I didn't grow up saying no to my mom or dad. Like, that was scary. Like, I would be spanked if I said no. So as children, like 2-year-old, they learn to say no. There's no problem with that. But we train them because that your no is not accepted. And then the body learns that no means danger. So your body learns not to say it because your nervous system is, remember, still acting as a 5-year-old person. It's not acting as a 30-year-old person who can say no and won't get beaten up. no, it's still acting as that little boy. So yeah, with all the work that I like with my therapy, I always tell people just bring yourself in. Sometimes they'll call, they're like, I want to drag my son to the therapy. I want to have my husband come in, but they're not coming. I said, you just come. I'll work with you and you'll see the environment and you'll see all the changes that you'll see within your life.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, and particularly like bringing in your clients' experiences. I think that like grounds the discussion in like yeah those different experiences. Yeah, and I feel like with therapy it's like sometimes it works for some people, sometimes it doesn't. And there's like different therapists that are good fits, like not a good fit. There's different modalities that work for some people and not for other people. I know for me, as I was in social work school, like being trained to be a counselor, I feel like yeah the change models were something that really made sense to me, in that like yeah like that was some a modality that was a way for me to understand myself, and something that I thought could be helpful for my clients, which is like more working in a dyad where you are like two people, or like seeing how if like perhaps like two people have a conflict, how yeah change has to happen on both ends. So yeah, I think there's like that's kind of the nice thing about therapy, that there's like a variety of people that you can work with, a different modalities. Yeah, and sometimes yeah, I feel like something I'm grappling with as I like go through my PhD is like maybe like therapy sometimes isn't for everyone. So really figuring out what's a good fit for you and what your needs are and how to yeah, get to have those needs met is really helpful. And I think yeah, therapy is a great way to go about that sometimes. Yeah, I'm wondering just two things. If there was anything that you would like to add as we wrap up our conversation, and if there are any resources that you would like to share with the people tuning in.
Um, yes, I mean, like you said, there's so many, like you just sort of have to find your therapy style. Sometimes people actually, go to group therapy. Like, I just referred a client to a grieving therapy group, which actually helped him so much better than a therapy would have helped him, because he actually sat with people who were also grieving their partner, and it helped him. So yeah, I think to be able to, sort of like, yeah, one traditional model doesn't go with everybody. That's true. You have to find that matches sort of matches your style, and something that's helpful. And sometimes I think just sort of sitting with a friend, now that we become a very lonely society, and we actually our connecting point has become a very poor quality. And when we connect, we're usually connect sometimes there's a lot of noise, and then just, or maybe always being on the phone, and so our actually quality of connections don't happen. So I think a lot of therapy is that, just being able to have quality connections with people around you. So that's a big, that's therapeutic as well. Yeah, but other than that, I think online you can, I post mental health videos, and I talk about different subjects. So those are good. If that's a good fit for you, you can look at, I mean, you can listen to some of them as well. You can also send me some questions. This is for parents who are not able to afford therapy, or who are not able to come to me for therapy for whatever reasons, or not go to other therapists. So you can send me questions at Facebook message. My page is Palwinder Gill Counseling. You can send me those questions, and I will try to give you a practical solution for it, something that you can follow, something that can, a small change that you can do to get a bigger impact at home. So yes, yeah, that's there. And yeah, and conversation like these, I think, just sort of opening up, and really talking about this stuff, it helps, to get the conversation going within the community.
Oop. Awesome. Thank you so much, Balvinder. Yes, we have your videos posted actually on our website. You do some fantastic explainers about what is addiction, what is therapy, both in English and Punjabi. So that's like, yeah, such a wonderful, helpful resource to get people introduced into these yeah modes of help that are available for people, and like yeah in knowledge sharing. So yeah, we really appreciate those resources, and yeah, we really appreciate your conversation here with us today. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Manvinder. Thank you, Harpreet. It was great connecting with you guys.
Thank you for joining Saath, the Asra podcast. If you have enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe or follow our social media at asra.now so you never miss an episode.
We would love to know what you think about today's episode. Please leave us a comment or send us a direct message. If you have any suggestions for future podcast guests, please fill out the Google form on our website or in the episode description. If you'd like additional information or resources in Punjabi or in English, please visit the Asra website at www.asranow.ca. Thank you.